this season. There are a lot of things. 2020 is the year of the asterisk for just about everything. So if baseball is only a 60-game season, maybe it gets played entirely in Arizona. Governor Doug Ducey said that his state would be willing to host all 30 major league teams. If that's how we're to start, we're to finish, I don't know, but I do believe everybody wants to jump back in. Let's get started. And I just keep thinking about a cake that's baking. And no matter how fast we want that cake to be done, we can turn up the temperature. That's not going to make the cake cook better. It might ruin it. When the cake is ready, the cake is ready. And I think Dr. Fauci presents a realistic situation that could bring sports back sooner than maybe it would be otherwise.
We see it with sport like baseball that goes on all summer and into the fall, and we can talk about the NFL if you want. What about basketball, though? Mark Cuban was on this network earlier. He's also in support of doing the whole no-fan approach. So maybe they figure out, at least maybe some sort of NBA playoff format. Put everybody in Las Vegas or something like that. What are you hearing on that front? That maybe we'll see some basketball too? Or?
Basketball is the one which seems to be the most maybe up in the air on where we go. And remember, they were the first to suspend operations. And this is already well over a month that we haven't had our major professional sports. The NBA interest, something like the horse competitions, the virtual sports and whatnot. Who knows what it's going to be with the NBA or with all sports for this matter. I think as Dr. Fauci said, the reality is going to dictate what we can do. And Major League Baseball also said, thanks to Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida for offering for us to play in Florida, because DeSantis opened up, made an essential business of worldwide wrestling entertainment, which is in Orlando. So the baseball commissioner, Rob Manfred, or baseball saying thanks for that, but we're going to wait. We're going to follow all the guidelines, and only when it's safe for our players, for our staff, for the fans, for the public, will we resume. Again, Connell, I'm sure you've done a trip with your kids before, and they're asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? If we're going from New York to Florida, I don't even know where we are yet if we're in the Carolinas.
I hear you. Well, we hope we'll see a little bit before the end of these seasons. Jared, always good to see you, my friend, or talk to you in this case. Jared Max. Melissa.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Good evening, everybody. President Trump today spending much of his time and energy on preparation for the reopening of America's economy. President Trump speaking to a number of members of his new Great American Economic Revival industry groups, a list of more than 200 industry leaders, encompassing everything from financial, services, retail, healthcare, big tech, sports, and more. The president's discussions a precursor to a larger meeting tomorrow on the opening of the economy, with the governors of all 50 states attending, at least by teleconference, and about when and how soon they may be able to put the country and Americans back to work. The White House already working on new guidelines for those governors, working together to put restart plans into operation. The CDC and FEMA reportedly coming up with a framework for those new recommendations, advising states to, among other things, come out of mitigation in a controlled way with robust monitoring systems in place to contain new cases and outbreaks, adding that, quote, leaders at all levels will need to prepare communities for occasionally returning to stricter mitigation measures for brief periods as needed to continue containing the disease. President Trump's current guidelines to slow the spread of the Wuhan virus expire at the end of this month. He's now suggesting some states that are the least hard hit may be able to reopen by then, and some perhaps sooner.
It's going to be very, very close, maybe even before the date of May 1st. So that will be for some states. Actually, there are over 20 that are in extremely good shape. And we think we're going to be able to get them open fairly quickly, and then others will follow. The federal government will be watching them very closely and will be there to help.
The deadly Wuhan virus that shut down much of America has now infected more than 2 million people all around the world and killed more than 133,000 others. In the United States, the Wuhan virus has infected now 619,000 Americans and killed 27,000 more. As the numbers continue to rise, President Trump has made it clear he holds both China and the World Health Organization responsible and that there will be consequences. President Trump has announced the first of those consequences. He ordered a freeze on the hundreds of millions of dollars the United States contributes each year to the World Health Organization. The president says the group is complicit in China's efforts to cover up the impending pandemic for which the Chinese are entirely responsible.
The WHO failed to investigate credible reports from sources in Wuhan that conflicted directly with the Chinese government's official accounts. There was credible information to suspect human-to-human transmission in December 2019, which should have spurred the WHO to investigate and investigate immediately.
And the decision to halt funding, bringing howls of criticism from Chinese-aligned multinationals, globalist billionaires, Wall Street and their lobbyists, the Chamber of Commerce, of course, rhinos and radical Dems, such as Nancy Pelosi, who today wrote this, quote, "This decision is dangerous, illegal, and will be swiftly challenged." Her comments echoed by Communist China's foreign ministry today, which demanded the United States earnestly fulfill their tasks and obligations to the WHO. This is the same foreign ministry whose propaganda began the lie and sustained the outrageous nonsense of that lie, and it added that the U.S. military had brought the deadly disease to China. Remarkable. Well, China's propaganda and lies have been so fully exposed over the past 2 months that almost everyone in the world knows that China lies and is responsible for millions of infections and more than 100,000 deaths. Yet the Chinese government lies continue despite that exposure. A new report today shows Communist Party leaders covered up information for almost a week in full knowledge that they were facing the prospect of a complete outbreak of the coronavirus and that the contagion was sweeping through Hubei province. That determination had been made on January 14th by Chinese health officials. It took another week until January 20th before China's leader Xi Jinping warned the Chinese public about the severity of the outbreak. During those 6 days, tens of thousands of Chinese attended a mass banquet in the contagion's epicenter, Wuhan. How critical were those 6 days in which the Chinese covered up the deadly nature of the contagion that they had unleashed? The University of Southampton in the UK filed a report showing China's cover-up cost as many as 95% of the world's cases. That's how severe the cover-up is, and that cover-up, by the way, lasted much longer than 6 days. It's also significant, by the way, that the radical Dems and the left-wing national media spend now and for the past 2 months the majority of their time criticizing President Trump and his handling of the coronavirus epidemic. Well, they have nothing to say either about the origin of the virus in China or the cover-up by the Communist Chinese government. Case in point, CNN had to change the story on their website that cited a media outlet controlled by the Chinese Communist government. The original headline was, "China's PLA Navy controlling coronavirus and aircraft carriers deployment proves it," report says. Well, that sounded very much like propaganda. After they were called out, CNN's new headline was revamped to read, "Chinese state media claims country's Navy is not affected by the coronavirus." Well, at least they changed it, didn't they? Well, joining us tonight is Peter Navarro. He's assistant to the president's trade czar in the White House, member of the president's coronavirus task force, and the president appointed him as point man to enforce the Defense Production Act. Peter, good to see you and to have you with us. Let's start with, first of all, the World Health Organization. You could almost triangulate. We can triangulate who is supporting who, and the Chinese alignment and the president. They diverge rather dramatically, don't they?
Lou, that was one of the best summaries of the implication of the World Health Organization and the slaughter of tens of thousands of people around the world. The two dates that stick out for me Or January 14th, that was the day that the Chinese delegation came here to shake our hands and sign the trade deal. It was also the same day that the World Health Organization was once again denying human-to-human transmission, even though Taiwan had told them there was such evidence of that 2 weeks earlier. The other date that sticks out is March 11th. That's the date finally when the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic after more than 100 countries already had infection. And you know, and I know, Lou, that it was because China was able to exert pressure on their puppet at the WHO, Tedros, from Ethiopia, client state of China. And what's puzzling to me, Lou, is how the likes of the CNNs and MSNBCs and radical Dems could get in bed with that, because this is one of the most worst cases I've ever seen of an international organization not meeting its responsibility. And there's blood on their hands. And it would be nice if this country were united on that, because the evidence is overwhelming.
The evidence is overwhelming, and the absurdity that the United Nations, the World Health Organization, were so late to take any action, responsible action. And now we're hearing from a number of people who are part of, if you will, the international medical public health, government public health agencies. They are clamoring for the president to restore funding, to just ignore all that has transpired over the past 3 months, whether it be the actions of China in unleashing this pandemic on the world, or the World Health Organization doing so pitifully little for countries like Italy, Spain, and others all around the world.
Lou, one of the things that troubles me the most about all this is that while China was hiding behind the shield of the World Health Organization, not letting the world know of the seriousness of this, it was going systematically around the world, vacuuming up all of the personal protective equipment that people in America and Milan and everywhere else would need to defend themselves. And they bought over 2 billion masks between January 24th and the end of February alone. And that, look, Lou, I mean, you and I both know that that kind of thing is tragic by historic proportions. And for anybody to defend the WHO's actions in this, it really is troubling. If any American would support that, they just need to look at the facts here and rise above this partisan bickering that is so common today in the middle of this crisis on the left.
Well, the left is attacking the president. Has been their that's been their method of operation from the very beginning of the Trump presidency, and as we well know, for months and months before he was elected. So I don't know that we should expect a change, but one can do this, and that is what the president has done. And I don't think there are many leaders who would have had his character or capacity to do so, to actually defund, put on hold funding of the World Health Organization and hold it up to the world community for what it is. And it is a political organization. Once again, 5 of the top positions have been operatives of either the Chinese directly or the client states of the Chinese. This has to change.
Lou, the UN has 15 different specialized agencies, and you're right, 5 of those are directly controlled by the Chinese, with a Chinese national at the head of those. And then, of course, they control through proxies like the WHO. And the problem is that even though China wants to be part of the international community, it doesn't want to obey the rules of the international community, and it's subverting our institutions. We cannot afford another mistake by the World Health Organization in the middle of this pandemic, because every mistake they make is going to lead to death and more disease. So I think the president was absolutely right about this. He made a strong, courageous decision. But again, Lou, the evidence is overwhelming, and anybody in America who objects to this decision by the president really needs to do a deep think on this and look at the data, because this is unacceptable. They hid the truth from the world. People died.
Absolutely, and this is a clear basis for reform for the way in which we conduct this country. This is not, in my opinion, about the way others behave. Other countries are led. They are what they are. They are headed in the direction they are. There's very little that we can do about that. But we can change the direction of this country, as the president has demonstrated for the first 3 years of his presidency. We can restore not only independence in energy, we can at the same time be independent in our supply lines and supply chains throughout Asia. Indeed, of course, China itself, first and foremost. We are so dependent. It isn't just about medical supplies or medical equipment. It's about pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical intermediates, whether it's India or whether it's China. It doesn't really matter much. We need to be in possession of those critical, strategically significant production products and services.
Well, it's a tragedy to offshore jobs in things like machine tools, electronics, and autos. And what we lose there is our manufacturing base and our jobs and our wealth and our wages. When you offshore our pharmaceuticals and medical supplies and equipment, you also lose lives. And that's what we're learning in this pandemic. The degree to which we have offshored all of that is astonishing. And as you know, Lou, here at the White House, in my office just across the street here, about 40 yards away, I'm spending all of my time trying to ensure that we have what we need through the supply chain to get the equipment we need and the medicines to the people of America. And it's been an eye-opener to see just how spread across the globe our supply chains are. But we're making great progress. I'll give you a little breaking news today. Honeywell opened the Smithfield, Rhode Island factory to begin making masks. That was done in less than 30 days, Trump time, under the Trump administration. Yesterday, GM was able, from start to finish, in 11 days, repurpose an auto factory in Kokomo, Indiana, and we're rolling those ventilators this weekend into Gary, Indiana, and Chicago. So this is what this country is capable of under this president in times of crisis. And I couldn't be more proud of this president.
Well, the fact is, he is the difference for this country and the direction that we take. And I think most people are beginning to understand that in this country, those who haven't already figured it out, that he is the right leader in the right place at the right time for this nation. Peter Navarro, as always, it's great to have you with us, and thanks for all that you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Lou. Keep at it, buddy.
Take care. You bet. Good to see you. Testing for the Wuhan virus. The tests have declined more than 30% from the previous week. Why is that? Is it good news or is it bad news? American Clinical Laboratory Association telling Politico that samples tested fell from 108,000 on April 5th to 75,000 on April 12th. The CDC's testing guidelines prioritize hospitalized patients, healthcare workers, and high-risk populations. The CDC stresses that testing is ultimately up to state and local health departments and individual clinicians. But is it dropping because there are fewer with symptoms, or is it dropping for some other reason that we don't yet understand? Right now, it is the latter. The national left-wing media today trumpeting headlines of new hydroxychloroquine studies that cast doubt on the drug's effectiveness in treating the Wuhan virus. One study out of China looked at the effects of the drug on 150 patients. The drug and those tests did not clear those patients of the virus, but did alleviate their symptoms. A study in France found no statistical difference in patients who took the drug and those who didn't when looking at ICU admissions or death within a week of being admitted to the hospital. What does that mean? Well, today's headlines, like hyped malaria pill doesn't help clear coronavirus in this study ran in Bloomberg, while French study finds hydroxychloroquine doesn't help patients with coronavirus ran on CNN. Those are big headlines. Yet when it comes to the study by a French doctor in which 92% of 1,061 virus patients were cleared of the virus within 10 days, that study isn't headlined. Instead, headlines like Slate writing this: the Trumpian French doctor behind the chloroquine hype. Politico's headline: Macron meets with controversial chloroquine doctor touted by Trump. And the Daily Beast meet the BS artist behind Trump's miracle drug. Well. Let's find out what's going on. Joining us to take up all this and more, Dr. Mehmet Oz, host of the Dr. Oz Show, director of Columbia University's Integrative Medicine Center. Doctor, good to have you back with us. And first, your reaction to the divergency and the divergence of headlines, whether you're left or right in the country, or for that matter in the world.
I'm stunned that we have politicized medicine. You at least think within the medical community we could agree that facts should win the day. And that unfortunately, like you point out, it gets stunningly more diverse. I mean, I really do wish this product, hydroxychloroquine, had never been mentioned by the president or anybody else. It's remarkable because the drug's been around and loved by many, approved in this country in 1955. And does it work to the U.S. standards? Everyone should say the same thing here is we haven't actually done the clinical trials. I had the chief investigator from the University of Minnesota on my show today. He's the most advanced of any trial. We're helping him enroll people. I'm trying to pull the oars with them. That's what we should all be doing. Get people enrolled. We'll find out. But take this report from China that you mentioned. I was so surprised when I saw the headline. I got a preprint of the paper yesterday. I read it. It's pretty clear. The researchers had 150 patients. Listen carefully. They didn't give the pills until 17 days after symptoms. That's pretty late, but they were honorable. They studied all these patients, and they actually stopped the study prematurely because they wanted others to see it. Why? Because there was a statistically significant improvement in clinical symptoms, and the blood markers for inflammation, including something called C-reactive protein, was statistically significantly improved. And they thought that's something we want to know. Now, there was no improvement in the viral load of the patients, which is a nice thing to know, but I care about symptoms too, and so do most doctors. So what the researchers are arguing is not a pro or con against President Trump or anybody else. They're saying, listen, maybe one of the ways hydroxychloroquine works is by changing how the inflammatory process responds to the virus. And by preventing it from overreacting, it can help patients feel better, recover quicker, and it might explain some of the other symptoms found. For example, in another randomized trial that in China was released last week, showing that the CT scan images improved. And likewise, in those patients, they got symptomatically better. Why would you ignore that? Why would you focus on studies that show other aspects? But by the way, not everything's positive. There was another randomized trial that didn't show a benefit. The French study you mentioned, which was given, by the way, to people who were very, very ill, which is not when this medication, according to experts who use it, should be given. They say give it early. Right. But so I'm not sure why we would begin hyping the truth. It is what it is. Just present the obvious reality. Just, you know what, if you just quote the researchers of this Shanghai study, just quote them. It is readily evident what they're saying, which is this is not a panacea. It didn't clear the virus, but it did a lot of things we like a lot. We liked it so much, we really think it needs to be investigated more. Here, world, take our data. That's not how it got reported, and quite the opposite. People were opining, saying this proves we shouldn't look any further. I'm rooting for Americans to feel better and get better. Wouldn't we all want to root for that?
Well, and there are so many instances of people, the symptoms improving. And I will tell you as a layman, if your chest is filled with congestion, you can't breathe. And one of the things that this drug does, apparently, is to relieve that congestion, and as one of the symptoms. I mean, that's a marvelous result in and of itself, if it did no more than that, because that's the way a lot of people are dying.
Well, the fact is, Lou, we won't know for sure till we finish our U.S. trials. There's several running. I just was with the governor of South Dakota, and they have the great Sanford healthcare system there that's spearheading it, the biggest rural system in the country. We've got Americans trying to figure this out. But in the meantime, Why would you create more controversy dismissing a medication that might be beneficial and might not be? But right now, for many doctors, it's their best tool. And you introduce a sense of suspicion and subterfuge into the process that's unwarranted. Let the doctors review the data by giving them the honest opinion of it, not the headline that makes it look like this stuff is toxic and poisonous and you definitely shouldn't try it.
And what you were talking about, the deceit, the duplicity, the deception that's going on in the national media, because that's who we are talking about here with these headlines. These aren't just random headlines. It's a clear delineation between the left and right, and also between objective journalism and at the best you could call it would be advocacy journalism. It's propaganda in many respects. But that's what's happening throughout our society, whether it's medicine, whether it's business, whether it's politics. And that's where we are today in this country. We're also, of course, involved in this pandemic. We are looking at reaching, we hope, this week, a peak, some sort of peak in the progress of the disease, and perhaps then soon thereafter a plateau or hopefully a decline. Where do you think we are? What is your assessment?
Well, I'm intrigued that the testing has dropped 30%, as you mentioned earlier. One of the reasons that might be happening is because less people are feeling ill and going to seek treatment. There are other hypotheses as well. I personally believe part of it is we've been educating Americans and physicians not to send every patient to get tested because we didn't have enough. And now that we've actually been able to contain a little bit with our social distancing this outbreak, now we have enough tests, we should sort of free it up a little bit. So get people tested. They shouldn't have to hold back like they did in the past. But here's my thought. I did a fascinating interview today with the governor of Georgia, Governor Kemp. And Georgia's become the technology hub of the Southeast. They've got Georgia Tech there, a lot of great technology companies. My partner ShareCare's there. And they're rolling out this cool idea that they're going to take care of the first responders, who are the ones who did not get to stay home. They have to go arrest people, and they expose themselves. So the Atlanta Police Department, and Dave Wilkinson, who, by the way, was President Bush's head of security on 9/11. So he was there at the school when 9/11 happened, and he can very clearly relate what's happening now to back in 9/11. He's rolling out this idea that doesn't take away the freedom of anybody. It says, hey, listen, first responders, if you're feeling any of these symptoms, we'll get you, just click here, we'll get you a test, automatically tells you where to go, tells you how to get there, then rapidly tells you what to do if you test positive, who do you tell about being positive, how do we make sure that you're informed so you don't run away from information that should shed a light. And this is one of the reasons I think that state's done a pretty good job handling this virus. You know, many police departments are just ravaged with infections. The Atlanta PD has done a pretty good job. That's a good example. We're not taking away civil liberties. We're letting technology with testing start to lead us forward, because this is really about data, right? It's not dates. We can guess what day we're going to be open, but we need the data to support it and make the right decisions. And I'm very encouraged by Abbott, who announced this morning they said that they're going to start making about 1 million of these antibody kits this week, 4 million this month, and then 20 million by June. Now think about this. That means we can begin to figure out who's actually had the virus. I'm of the belief that there may be a lot more people who've been either ill enough but not ill, sick, but so they suspect something, but not enough to go do anything about it, or never knew they were ill but still had COVID-19. If that number's large, it gives us more confidence moving forward.
Dr. Oz, always good to have you with us, and I agree with you. A number of physicians and public health officials I'm talking to are suspicious of exactly what you expressed, that there is a broader asymptomatic population in the country that perhaps didn't even know that they've had it, and that, anyway, we'll hope that everyone is asymptomatic in this country very soon. Thank you so much. Well, new business records for the Chinese company BHR Partners show Hunter Biden is still a board member, even after he vowed to resign back in October. Biden's attorney, however, says this about that report and those who are reporting that his name is still attached to the company. Hunter Biden resigned from the board of directors in October 2019. He's not been on the board since then, period. This database will be updated when there is a successor named for the board seat that Hunter Biden left vacant when he resigned in October. That is one of the most peculiar explanations I have ever heard about why a man's name is attached to a board seat for any firm. Well, red storm rising, obviously. China using the Wuhan virus pandemic to gain more control over the global health industry. On Monday, Iran's state-run newspaper published an op-ed from China's ambassador to Iran, pushing for a, quote, health Silk Road, an extension of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese President Xi pushing this health Silk Road to Italy just last month. Well, joining us tonight to take all of this up, Gordon Chang, columnist, author, senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. Gordon, you have been following this case long before people were calling it a pandemic, and we know now without equivocation that the Chinese were covering up from the moment that the respiratory disease was, or novel pneumonia was present in Wuhan. We are also looking at a World Health Organization, as you and I have discussed numerous times, that is being influenced by is just too gentle an expression. It's being run by the CCP, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is, Lou. You know, China's two main initiatives. One was to say this disease was not transmissible H to H, human to human. And the World Health Organization backed that up in that infamous January 14th tweet. Well, Chinese leaders knew that it was so transmissible from about the second week, maybe the third week of December. They didn't admit it until January 20. WHO backed them up on that. WHO backed them up on another important initiative, which was the Chinese leaders did not want travel restrictions or quarantines on arrivals from China. So the WHO on January 10th issued its statement supporting China's position. And in addition to that, the WHO expressed confidence in the accuracy of China's death and infection numbers. All of these things lulled health officials in other countries not to adopt precautions that they otherwise would have, which means that the WHO helped spread this disease outside China's borders.
And now the World Health Organization, the president ordering a pause in their funding, a 90-day freeze, if you will. Is it sufficient to hold up their funding, to end the U.S. funding of the World Health Organization? Or are there reforms that would make the WHO palatable? Your thoughts?
Yeah. The one thing that has to be done, Lou, is that Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the WHO, Bruce Alward is essentially his number two, and perhaps a fair amount of the rest of the senior leadership, including Chinese nationals, must resign. Because if they don't do that, the WHO is not going to function well. I know that there are a lot of great doctors and great professionals in the WHO. They do fantastic work. But the senior leadership nullifies that work. And we learned that on Monday when a senior WHO doctor, Maria van Kerkhoff, talked about this in public at a press briefing where she said she knew that this was H to H,